I'm Angela McKenzie. On today's program, I'm in conversation with David Bancroft, the founder of USA Patriotism, an online educational resource center with positive cultural expressions of American pride. Mr. Bancroft is based in Houston, Texas, and by all accounts, he's an archetypal, patriotic conservative. But well into our conversation, he reveals a particular viewpoint that could very well be considered liberal, or at the least, very open-minded. So sit back and listen to my conversation with Mr. David Bancroft of USA Patriotism. David, USA Patriotism holds a non-political mission to help other citizens of the world develop a better understanding and friendlier attitude towards the USA. Now, for many years, people from all over the world wanted to immigrate to the USA to live out their American dream. This would mean they had a great attitude towards the country. Do you think this has changed? And if so, where did we go wrong?
I think the majority of Americans feel the same way. It's just the mindset, being involved in so many other things, whether it's related to technology, advancements, where they're preoccupied. And not to get specifically political towards one party or another, the mindset of some of the leaders, whether they weren't raised in a greatest generation family setting, maybe part of that cause. There's many variables. I just don't think it's displayed as well, and therefore that's how I've seen it, especially since I've founded USA Patriotism. Before USA Patriotism, before 9/11, there was strong patriotic feelings. They were just underneath the surface. You just weren't outwardly displaying them.
But what do you think we did to change the view of those foreigners and folks who really wanted to immigrate here? Because you say part of your mission is to help other citizens of the world get a better understanding and a friendlier attitude towards the USA. What did we do to the folks outside of our borders?
That could go back to World War II, the Cold War, people wanting to get out of a repressed political environment. Look, the United States of America was eventually came to be based upon people leaving England for freedom of religion back in the 1600s, and a lot of that applies today. Maybe not as much as it did back during the Cold War, where you'd have people coming from Russia or coming from other countries, and then the political environment within that given country may be part of that. But we also have, each country has their own generation going forward. So that specific generation of any given country may be part of that reason in itself, how they view their own country relative to the United States, how the how the media within that given country may reflect on the United States. And there are certain things we just cannot control from that standpoint. I would have to say the media at home in America, depending on how they represent the United States, can be the same. I would say the tendency to think that we're not unique or very special in the eyes of some politicians, I don't think has been helpful in that regard. Again, I think the majority of Americans feel that we are very unique based upon how the United States was founded. I hope we just never lose sight of that, and I think that can be part of the reason why immigration's not as strong. I don't know if the immigration laws have changed in that regard, or how the bureaucracy may play a part into that. You probably have to ask somebody more involved in that area.
By virtue of the world being more interconnected through cyber technology, do you think the American patriotic spirit could easily go the way of the dinosaur in the not-too-distant future in favor of a more global perspective?
I will say that if some people in America have their way, that could happen. I think that's a minority. Unfortunately, there are leaders who have, just based upon actions or comments, had made me feel that, they want to become more like, I don't want to call it a global nation or under the United Nations, but more like how Europe, trying to tie into the Europe mindset. And, it's fine to have a global attitude, but you draw the line when it comes to a country's independence, like especially the United States of America. Everything the United States has done has been to better the world. You tell me, I would like those on the other end to say, when has the United States ever gone somewhere and retained ownership of a country? We leave the country after blood and treasure has spent, and very seldom do we ask for repayment, where in history, when that has happened, usually it becomes part of your empire. The United States is the one country that has never done that. And so in that regards, that bothers me when people talk about being part of the global community. We're already there. And we should never lose our exceptionalism. And I think the majority of Americans feel the same way. It's the minority who express it, and it gets covered more than anything else.
But the hippie movement, I think, was made popular here in the United States, particularly upstate New York and Woodstock. What's wrong with being one happy, loving, give peace a chance, united world family?
If something happens, who are they going to call on? Who do you call, the Ghostbusters? Well, the United States of America has been the Ghostbusters for the world since World War II. Well, go back to World War I. Now, it proved itself in the War of 1812 against Great Britain, and that pretty much put it on its track to where it is today. We had the unfortunate issue with the Civil War and the reasons for it. That goes back into the early stages of how our country developed its Constitution and some of the things they did not act upon, which, in my opinion, should have done that. But that doesn't change what the United States has done for other countries. Each country has their own problems internally that they have to resolve. And most countries older than us still haven't resolved that. So for some odd reason, they come to the United States when the need is the greatest, and especially when they're being attacked externally. And so in that regards, you can express yourself as an American as long as, you follow the laws, you pay the consequences otherwise. So, the hippies and all that, they had their rights, they did things that they shouldn't have done. And sometimes we look the other way in this country, depending on who's in charge of our media, I should say, or as we just say, the majority of the media. And I'm kind of getting political here, but that's just been the nature of how our country has been relative to the media. They cover what they feel is newsworthy from their perspective. Not necessarily, I don't think the majority of Americans espouse that, but that's what we see and it's covered. I don't know if that's answering your question or not. I'm old enough to remember all that. I wasn't old enough to participate, nor would have. I'm a practical person. I see the fun in certain things, but I look at what I could be doing that I would enjoy better.
The U.S. military has provided opportunities for young Americans to travel the world and learn about other countries and cultures. Unfortunately, this kind of international exposure and understanding has not lessened the occurrence of war or young people enlisting for military service. Why do you think this is the case? Why is it war after war after war?
War is caused for many reasons. We go back to the Roman times and that. It wasn't about religious, it was about power. It was about dominating and controlling the lands around you and subjugating the people therein. Yes, and when you were conquered, back then, you didn't have the freedoms that America allows, the freedom of religion to express yourself. You either did as the conquering country said, or you did not survive if you were not a citizen, and you became slaves. Look how World War I was started. It was an assassination. France and England went to war how many times? Germany went to war to dominate. In today's environment, you also have the religious aspects into it. Forget about why America goes to war. We don't start wars. We end them, or we come to the aid of others. We may not looked upon, and they may not looked upon that way in a regional aspect. You even got the mindset of tied strictly right into one's religious belief. One of the black stains that I see is Christians fighting Christians. In Ireland, you got Catholics and Protestants fighting. That was a war. It may not have been a war of trying to conquer another nation, but that's a religious type of war. You have that in the Middle East. People talk about the Arabs against the Jews, for example, that we may have a war coming up, which America would probably have to become involved in. But you also have different Muslim faiths against each other, as is the case with in Iraq. same faith. There's so many different reasons why you have a war. The one thing I don't see America going to war on is on that basis. We look at it as the freedoms, including the rights of women, which unfortunately is not the case when you look at other faiths. They have not reached that point in other countries where women have the religious freedoms that they enjoy in European countries and in America. And it took America a long time to do that as well. No country is without fault. It's a progression of how they realize the rights that people are created equal. And that, thankfully, America has done that. And it's one of the youngest nations in the world. It's a shame where you look at some of the oldest nations, and they have not done that. And that's one place where you're going to have war because of maybe there's a middle age. I don't want to say that's how they live, but the mentality goes back hundreds of years, and they have not changed that. Now, why we go to war, why the troops join, some of it is really due to economic situations. It can be their own environment. Our youngest son joined the military to find himself. That's the same way with many young men today and women. You as a parent, as us all, can just do so much to guide your child in that. God forbid, once knowing, we had some interesting time with our children as teenagers and that, and it's always love, but that's a part of growing up and the independence and the parents having to give and that. But there comes a time when a young adult has to decide what they want to do. And many young men and women find that the military is the best opportunity for them at the time. It can be for a lot of reasons, economic, and just trying to get your life together. And then once they get out, the country's better off for them in so many ways for their service of their country and that. So there's not any one particular thing. And then you do have, like back our greatest generation, they joined because we got attacked. And that's the one thing that I do strongly believe is that mindset is still there with, again, I say the overwhelming majority, including our young people. Don't mess with the United States of America. If you think you can attack America, regardless of when in the future, that is an underlying strength that makes us unique. We will fight.
There are Americans who express their patriotism and support for the troops through anti-war protests. Now, as the father of a military man, when you see the anti-war activists in action, at the gut level, do you feel that your son is being criticized for his decision to serve in the armed forces, or can you appreciate the protesters' point of view as well?
Well, everything's based upon the reason why they're doing it. And to me, many of them do if there's political reasons behind it. My son, he's now a Marine veteran, but when he was serving, I got very upset and angry over politicians. You can voice your reasons, but why are you doing it? What is the purpose behind it? When President George W. Bush was in office, a lot of that was geared towards political purposes, for the next election. And it's kind of just tied into the media feeds on it, and then the politicians. You go back to when the politicians first unanimously say, let's go into Iraq. That's when my son was part of the invasion force. And as soon as you get in there, and you have some cash or whatever, and they see the possibility of the political winds changing, boy, do they jump off the support bandwagon and they start forgetting that they were supported it, and they start talking about what's going on. And I won't mention one particular one, was Senator. He passed away, but I remember distinctly, and I wrote an article about it. You can find my article on there, commenting on Donald Rumsfeld for the Secretary of Defense. 3 strikes. What we think about this particular senator had issues when he was a younger man, and I thought that was very ironic to use 3 strikes when this particular gentleman had more than 3 strikes in his own career. And then never going to Iraq, and sitting there saying, why did you do that when we had men in combat who were facing a deadly force, many have fallen, and you make comments like that when you have parents like me listen to that. There's only one way you're going to take that. You're going to be very unhappy, and you see it as grandstanding and political. I do not like that at all. We should never, ever make our troops a political conversation.
What about the ordinary American when you have groups? I can't remember the names of the folks, but you've got the public having an outcry against the war, and that's the way they choose to support the troops. Does that upset you at all?
Not really. It's, like I said, it's why are they saying it?
But in this case, I think in the case of the younger Bush era, the talk was we're going to war for oil, and we're spilling our young people's blood in pursuit of oil.
No, I don't. Yeah, that bothers me because that's not the truth. That to me is politically driven.
Okay, so you think they're picking up on the politicians' rhetoric?
Or are they somehow tied into it? I always want to know. And now there are people who are legitimate. I mean, who could express it because they do not believe in war at any given cost. To me, that's not a political statement. I mean, I don't particularly want us to go to war at any given time either. I prefer us not going to war in that, but at the same time, if it's, we're attacked and you have someone harboring it and you're trying to prevent future attacks that could make 9/11 look small, you're trying to prevent dirty bombs being in America, there's just certain things that you have to do. In the losses, I'm not saying anything is acceptable, but you're trying to prevent something that would be even worse. And we're not privileged to all the daily briefings that a president has that for security reasons he cannot discuss. So when you have people making these comments, I always say, what's the motivation behind it? Do they have political intent? Who are they associated with? You don't hear that from the media reports. They have every right to do it, but I have every right to question the motivations, the reasons behind that. And when you have someone in the service, you're not particularly happy to hear them express it, even though you know they have the right, and I will support their right to speak out. I just disagree with it, and makes me wonder why they have to do it at that point, and what's the purpose behind it.
Now, David, I know when you're talking about USA patriotism, you don't like to talk politics as such, but I would appreciate it if you could tell me a little bit about your upbringing and maybe which way your family leaned politically. I think I can guess, but I want you to tell me.
I'm not a registered Republican. I was at one time in my 20s. I'm not now. I do try to look at the person based upon how they fit my personal viewpoints more so than anything else. It just happens to be it's more so on the Republicans, and that comes from a faith-based standpoint. And I'm not ashamed to say it that I have a rough time having someone tell me when life begins and when it doesn't, and when does that become a human and not a human, because I believe in God. I believe there's a higher power than man's law, and you can create a man's law because God has given us all free will. It doesn't mean God agrees with the decisions you make with your free will, and we all have to eventually atone for our decisions based upon our free will, including those who strongly feel that it's none of God's business, and they have that right under free will to do so. But if they should believe in a God, and he has laws that are above man's law, then you will atone too. That's how I make some of my decisions. Now, I'm not running for office, but if I was running for office for anything, I cannot tell you what you can or cannot do when it comes to certain things. I may disagree with it, but the one who's going to make that decision is between you and God. I would just not want to be you based upon decisions you make, including terminating a human in the womb. That's how I base decisions on. And that's just one example of what I'm talking about. But that, as we both know, has been a very, in the political mainstream lately about the attack on women and stuff of that nature. And yes, some can consider that an attack on women, but just the opposite way too, about does a child have a right to live? And my answer is yes. I don't see where God draws the line on 1 day, 1 week, 3 months. Eventually that fetus will be born if it's allowed to. That's the general premise of how I look at everything in life from a faith-based thing.
And that's pretty much how your family views things. You've developed that based on how you were brought up?
Yes. Well, my mother, she was heavily involved in the church. She never worked. And I will say this, I find that very interesting. One side tried to pit the other side, and it's about women's rights. And when you get into women's rights and you're attacking one on the other based upon the right of an unborn child to be able to live a life, that could be a female in the womb, What about her rights in the womb to have the ability to one day be born and to have her own children? No one even talks about that. So all that type of stuff makes me angry that they use it from a political standpoint, and they attack religious institutions because they stand up for that. That to me should be out of the political mainstream, but yet that's what we're doing. And what really kind of bothers me are those politicians who say they're strong in their faith, but they don't show it from a political standpoint. They cower, or they come up with excuses of why. To me, that is not living your faith. Now, I'm not saying you use your faith to enact a political agenda, but you should at least admit how you feel and be truthful about it, and don't make a political statement. That includes any type of faith. How do you do that? I guess that's one reason why I could not be a politician, and one of the reasons that I feel that Rick Santorum unfortunately found himself in a situation that wasn't fair to him. He espoused what he believed. Maybe from a political standpoint, he should have worded it. I would have said, like me, if you believe in a God, you still have to atone, even though you have a free will.
The pro-choice talk reminds me of, I think, a very liberal entertainer, Whoopi Goldberg. She mentioned one time that when her daughter was pregnant as a teenager, it's like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And the daughter said, this very young girl said, I'm going to keep my baby. I'm paraphrasing because I'm struggling with the memory. Whoopi said something like, that's right. Pro-choice means she has the right to choose to keep her baby as well. So I think immediately when you're thinking pro-choice, people think, yes, I have the right to have an abortion as a woman. But really, you have a right not to as well. I have a sneaking suspicion that a good majority of women who had abortions, they quietly have regrets about it and do think about, what's beyond this life. So whether they're, very much involved in religious activity, in Catholicism, whatever the case may be. Now, the other interesting thing, since we're on the family tip, is equal rights for women. So that kind of paints a picture of women having the right to go out and earn money and, compete for the same jobs as men and so forth. And I think there have been a couple generations of women who look down on housewives. It's like, what are you doing? You're, all this opportunity is out there. But again, women should have the right, the equal right to choose to stay home if they want to. And by the time this interview airs, it's going to be a stale reference, but to bring up Mrs. Romney, who was criticized very publicly for staying home and raising her 5 kids. She's never held a job in her life, so she was out of touch with economics and so forth. That's another thing this conversation brings to mind.
Children of our greatest generations, the majority of their mothers were stay-at-home moms. And let me get back. This is kind of a generational thing. To apply politically is, to me, absolutely abhorrent. And especially to have one woman say to another woman, and that particular woman, I can't remember her name. I know she's a political operative, and she advises the White House. To make that comment, and to be someone who has 7 figures, she's the wrong woman to have made the comment to begin with, just based upon her well-being. And yes, she has every right to work and to make that type of money. My mother, and I'm sure many mothers of our greatest generation, women, did not work, not because they didn't have to. It was their job. My wife is a great mother. She's a teacher. I would love that she didn't have to work if financially we're able, this and that. But if you wanted to work, I have no problem in that. I have no problem if you can financially afford it. In the world, the best thing for her, I think, to raise children is to have a mother as involved as possible. And if she can do it and you can financially afford to do it, stay at home as mom. The nurturing, I can't underscore how important that is for the children.
Now, back to my pop culture references. I personally believe it's if you can stay home and raise your children, that's the best thing. Because here in New York City, on the Upper West Side, if you head over there, you tend to see a lot of baby carriages being pushed by nannies. So these moms are very hardworking people. But here comes the pop culture reference. Tina Fey of Saturday Night Live, or formerly of Saturday Night Live, who would do the parodies of Sarah Palin. I once saw her on the David Letterman show. I believe it was Letterman, asked her, "So how's your daughter coming along? How's she growing up?" And Tina Fey's joke was, "Oh, she's growing up to be a very lovely Jamaican young lady." So that means she's spending so much time with the Jamaican nanny.
That is such a very timely statement by you, a reference, because it really, that's something that should be played back for a lot of reasons. The regret, I think, will be there when they get older and they look at their child, or they see, or they hear someone talking about what their child did, and they cannot relate to that, or they cannot enter into that conversation. The more you're involved with your children, going through their events and stuff like that, I think sets the stage for how they will be parents. For all those who feel it's not hard work to be a stay-at-home mom, that's a full-time job, and those women who do both have no free time at all, who really are focused on their career and on their children, where they're getting 4 or 5, 6 hours of sleep. But those who are just working and they have nannies, they're missing things that they can never, ever experience, because that is an experience, a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Blurring party lines, even Mrs. Obama had to come out and say, that just was not cool, because, of course, Michelle Obama has had a career and done the child-rearing thing, but I think she's gone out of her way in the East Wing to let folks know that, first and foremost, she's a mother. So, trying to prop the party up with that kind of comment wasn't acceptable on either side. Now, before I wrap up this final segment of the show, let me remind you that I'm in conversation with David Bancroft, the Houston, Texas-based founder of the online educational resource center, USA Patriotism. As I mentioned at the top of the program, by all accounts, Mr. Bancroft is the archetypal conservative American patriot. But in this last segment, he gives a surprising opinion about President Barack Obama and about the eligibility of other Americans who wish to run for presidential office. David, for the most part, the United States has welcomed people from all around the globe, and many of them have become successful and can find ways to give back to our society. The only way they can't serve is in the seat of the President of the United States, because that would be a violation of the Constitution. Now, since America is indeed a melting pot of cultures, do you think this aspect of the Constitution is outdated, and it might be valuable to open the opportunity to run for president to U.S. citizens who are born abroad?
No, I agree with that. I think that's one thing that Congress should change. I don't know whether it's you apply to it. You've been in the United States for 20 years. It's terrible to say it. Well, I'm not worrying about who runs, but everything else will apply then accordingly, and they will have to determine that. I also believe that term limits should apply to Congress and the Senate. The original intent of the Constitution was not a full-time Senate, if I understand it correctly. So now, House and Representatives, I do believe we're at a time when we need to have term limits both for senators and the congressmen. They don't necessarily have to work part-time. That means we'll even get less probably done. I don't know if we get more done. They're already working part-time because they're partisanship, but they're getting paid full-time. Now, whether it's 18 years for a senator, 3 terms, and I also believe that congressmen, U.S. representatives, should be voted every 4 years instead of every 2 years. We need to take some of the political gamesmanship out of the legislative branch. And one of the ways of doing it is let's stop having our congressmen elected every 2 years, because they're elected in the next maybe 6 months of work, and they're a year to a year and a half, they're campaigning to be reelected. That has to stop. That does not do any good for our country. That may have worked in the early years, but there's certain things that I think should change. And I see this from the founder of USA Patriotism. I don't see how the last couple of years, to me, from a political standpoint, has not benefit our country at all. They're more into themselves. Many, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them are more into what's best for them to get reelected versus what's best for the country.
Let me just confirm that I understand what you're saying. You wouldn't have a problem if, in fact, Barack Obama was not born in America, but he's a U.S. citizen.
I will have a problem with anyone based upon the law as is. I'm not saying he is or he isn't. If an individual was elected to the presidency based upon the law as it is stated now and knew that his birthplace was outside the United States and hid it to the electorate, then I have an issue because he was illegally elected and he withheld that information. That becomes an issue from the standpoint of what else don't we know about this individual that you're not willing to tell us. When he fundamentally lied about an aspect of how, the qualifications of being president, that is just based upon law. And there's nothing that bothers me more is someone doing that and then all of a sudden, that doesn't make any difference. Then what else doesn't make any difference from a legal standpoint? Now, going forward, if they change the law, I don't have any problems with that. If President Obama was, for example, born out of our country, but has been a citizen, a naturalized citizen for 20 years or more, and he runs for it, and we know it, and we vote him, fine. When Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California, they were talking about he would make a great president. And people said, well, he'll never be able to do it from that standpoint on. I would rather have somebody that would make our country better, who could be another Ronald Reagan, another FDR, from a leadership standpoint, another Abraham Lincoln, who could bring something to our country that would benefit us all. Then why not allow them the opportunity to run? It goes down to what you said. We're a melting pot. We're a nation of immigrants. As long as they're not illegal, fine.
Before we wrap up, I understand that USA Patriotism has started a project that involves the input of younger generations. Could you elaborate on this for me?
There's a section called Student Patriot, and Robert Breitenbach is just recently joined USA Patriotism as the director for this initiative that I started several years ago. When he came, we developed a new approach, online approach to USA Patriotism, make it easier for students to go there. I don't know if you're online. Do you have your browser open?
No, sir, I don't, because it's all about you.
In the menu, if anyone's visiting USA Patriotism, all they have to do is click on Student Patriot. You click on that, it'll take you to a section of Student Patriot, which is now a message board, where it lists all the poems, articles, videos that have been submitted to USA Patriotism by students anywhere from the first grade up to the 12th grade. Or it can be from adults who either did a poem or another patriotic artistic expression that were in first grade through the 12th grade. They can go back at that and show what they were doing at that age. They just can't submit something as an adult and put it in here. But Student Patriots, the whole purpose of it is for these students to come in and to express their love and pride of America. It can be about troops. It can be about the flag. It can be about a historical figure, a president, anything that's positive in nature. No attacks. One thing about USA Patriotism, this is not a negative site. It is something about expressing positive. Because truthfully, that's what I think the United States of America is. Everyone has their good and bad, but America was founded on a positive aspect. That's what our Constitution is about. And while we all have our problems, the goal is to correct them, and this is what the United States is about. And students have the opportunity to do it in their own section. If they have a poem, for example, that's submitted, it will also be put in the general poem section, so with a reference SP next to them saying Student Patriot. Same way with articles, same way with videos and that. But the other thing that Student Patriots is about, and Robert would be more than happy to talk to anybody about this. They can contact him via email if they want to be involved with Student Patriots, if they want to join his volunteer staff, to contact the local school districts to make the teachers, the history teachers, the English teachers aware of this. History teachers, where if they have a class assignment or something that they can do, they can either apply it on this, and they can actually go out and have their students now go on the message board and under the right forum, and they could list their points directly. Now it's queued for approval, But they can do that as a class assignment, and they can list a poem or essay. Each student can, or the teacher can do it as long as 13 and under, they have to have adult permission. But 13 and over, students can do it themselves. But that's one of the things that we're trying to do is encourage not only students, but youth organizations like the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Young Marine, to do this and get the parents involved as well to do this. To get them, we feel that this would be, it's a good way of learning about your own country, the reasons why, or expressing how you feel towards it. And it's one way that I think our younger generation, it would help them understand a little bit more about even what our greatest generation was all about, because at least it makes them think about it. They'll look into it. I mean, they're already doing this from a historical, in classes. Why not share it with other people, fellow Americans who come to USA Patriotism for exactly what they're writing about?
Yeah, I think putting pen to paper to express yourself from your perspective really brings home whatever lessons you're getting in the classroom. It kind of gels the two and makes it all relevant.
No, I agree. I did this with my oldest grandson. He was 5 years old when my youngest son went into war, and he would hum the Marine hymn and that, and I just thought about what can our students do, our America's Learning Generation do, and it finally came to me in 2006 that Student Patriots, the idea. There's a poem about it. I've written an article about it that insists on, he's got 3 videos that I had him film with me when we were up in Colorado. So the thing is trying to get people involved who have direct connections with their local school districts. Could be a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, squad leader, or someone in charge of one of the regional offices who gets involved and gets them to do it. And occasionally we get points and articles from individual students in that. But the best way to do it is trying to get the adults that they're associated with, to get them involved as, then it becomes a group type of thing. That's what the whole goal is, and that's why Robert reached out to me, and I said, would you be interested in this? And he happily took, he has, involvement with the Boy Scouts and that. This is volunteer, and this is what I ask for anyone to do it. If they're interested, they should contact Robert. They can they can find his email address on USA Patriotism. America has a great future, and its future is our young people, our students. That's the reason why they have their own place, and when they are older, they can come back and show their children what they did at USA Patriotism, hopefully encourage them to do the same thing, whether I'm here or not, and hopefully whether it's a foundation or, as I jokingly say, somebody who doesn't mind investing from a goodwill standpoint and allow USA Patriotism then to give scholarships to students, both in the military and those who earn it through contests. That's the long-term goal, what I like to do with USA Patriotism. But this is one way of doing it, is getting them involved, getting students involved, and their parents as well.
Let's get all the website and contact information out there for people who want to take a look, people who want to make a contribution in cash or in kind, whatever the case may be.
They go to USA-patriotism.com. That's the domain. They can also reach it by going to USAPatriotism.com. Put in the 3 W's in front, they'll get to it real quick. And contact information is on the website. They'll find the contact link at the top and the bottom of every page. Click on that and they'll be able to email me or Robert. If they just have general questions, they can send an email to patriots@USA-patriotism.com. The best way to do it is, spend some time at USA Patriotism. It's more than an hour's visit. There's nearly 13,000 pages. There's roughly 2,000 pages a year being added to content. So it could take several days to visit all of the site. And one little side note, I'm related to the George Bancroft, who is the father of American history.
He'd be proud of you. Thank you, David.
I appreciate it, Angela.